This is the review for Test 2 in Math 2. Problem number 1. Find the circumference of the figure, and you are given that the radius is equal to 4 inches. Remember, the circumference is pi times the diameter. If the radius is 4, that means that the diameter is 8. So I'm going to multiply 3.14 times 8. Now I just need to go through and multiply that 3.14 times 8. I'll do it here. 4 times 8 gives me 32. I put down the 2. I carry the 3. 8 times 1 gives me 8 plus 3 gives me 11. I put down the 1. I carry the 1. 8 times 3 gives me 24. Plus 1 gives me 25. So I get 2512. Remember, there's two numbers after the decimal point in the problem. I need two numbers after the decimal point in the answer, so I get 25.12. It is very important to remember that you need to label your answer, and I'm dealing with circumference. So my final answer to this problem is going to be 25.12 inches for the circumference. Problem number 2. Find the circumference of a circle with a diameter of 12 inches. Here, I already know what the diameter is, so I'm just going to multiply pi, 3.14, times 12. So I'm going to go 3.14 times 12. When I do that, I'll do that quickly over here to the side. 4 times 2 gives me 8. 1 times 2 gives me 2. 2 times 3 gives me 6. I'm going to put down a 0 as a placeholder. 4 times 1 gives me 4. 1 times 1 gives me 1. 3 times 1 gives me 3. I add all those together, I get 3768. And once again, I have two numbers after the decimal point in the problem. I need two numbers after the decimal point in the answer. The final answer is 37.68. And once again, I have to label it. It's going to be labeled as inches. Problem number 3. Find the area of the figure. And you're given a circle, and it says it has a diameter of 16 inches. The formula for area is pi times the radius squared. So I'm going to multiply 3.14 times the radius squared. If the diameter is 16 inches, the radius has to be 8. So it would be times 8 squared. Well, 8 squared means 8 times 8, which is equal to 64. So now I need to multiply 3.14 times 64. Once again, I'm going to go through that quickly. 4 times 4 gives me 16. 1 times 4 gives me 4, plus 1 gives me 5. 4 times 3 gives me 12. I'm going to put down 0 as a placeholder. 6 times 4 gives me 24. Put down the 4, carry the 2. 6 times 1 gives me 6, plus 2 gives me 8. 6 times 3 gives me 18. Now I'm going to add everything together, and I'm going to get 20096. Once again, I need two numbers after the decimal point in the problem, in the answer, because I have two numbers after the decimal point in the problem. So my answer is 200.96. Remember that you need square inches because we are talking about the area. Problem number 4 says to find the area of the figure, and you are given a parallelogram. Remember that to find the area of a parallelogram, you need to multiply the base times the height. The base of this is 3. The height of this is 10. It's not 12 because the height has to go straight up. So I'm just going to multiply 3 times 10. I'm going to get a final answer of 30. And once again, I do need to put in square feet because I am talking about area. Problem number 5 says to find the area of the figure, and you're given a triangle. So the area of a triangle is the base times the height divided by 2. I need to take a look at this. I have 3 measurements there. Remember that when you are talking about the base and the height, they meet at a 90-degree angle. So I would need to multiply 3 times 4 and divide that by 2. The 5 is irrelevant in this particular case because I'm finding the area. 3 times 4 gives me 12. 12 divided by 2 gives me 6. So the final answer to this is 6 square feet. Problems 6, 7, and 8, you are asked to find the mean, median, and mode of 6 different numbers. In order to find the mean, which is number 6, you need to add those digits together. I'm not going to go through that and do that right now, but I know that when I add those digits together, I get 90. And in order to find the mean, I would need to divide that by how many numbers there are. There are 6 numbers, so 90 divided by 6 gives me 15, which is the mean of those numbers. To find the median, the very first thing you need to do is you need to put those numbers in order from the smallest to the largest. So I'm going to do that here. It's 10, 13, 15, 17, 17, and 18, and then I need to find the number that's in the middle. As far as this one goes, there are 2 numbers in the middle, 15 and 17. So I need the number that is in the middle of those, which would be 16. Another way to do that would be to add 15 and 17 together. I would get 32. Dividing that by 2, I would get an answer of 16 for the median. The mode is which number appears most often in the set of data, and since I have 2 17s, the mode is 17. For problem number 9, in order to find out the cost of binding that rug, you are going to have to figure out the circumference. So the formula is the pi times the diameter. So I'm going to multiply 3.14 times 6, which is the diameter. If I go through and multiply 3.14 times 6, 4 times 6 is 24, put down the 4, carry the 2. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 2 is 8. 3 times 6 gives me 18, and I need to put in the decimal point. So the circumference of the rug is 18.84 feet. Now I need to go through and I need to multiply 18.84 times $5.40. So I'm going to multiply that times $5.40. If I multiply 0 times everything in that first number, I'm just going to get zeros going across. So I'm not even going to do that. I'm just going to put down my 0 for my placeholder and then start to multiply 4 times 4. 4 times 4 gives me 16. Put down the 6, carry the 1. 4 times 8 gives me 32. Plus 1 gives me 33. Put down the 3, carry the 3. 4 times 8 gives me 32. Plus 3 gives me 35. Put down the 5, carry the 3. 4 times 1 gives me 4, plus 3 gives me 7. Now I need 2 zeros because now I'm going to go through and multiply the 5 times everything. 5 times 4 gives me 20. Put down the 0, carry the 2. 5 times 8 gives me 40, plus 2 gives me 42. Put down the 2, carry the 4. 5 times 8 gives me 40, plus 4 gives me 44. Put down the 4, carry the 4. And 5 times 1 gives me 5, plus 4 gives me 9. Now I'm going to add everything up. When I add everything up, I get 1017360. But remember, I need to put in the decimal point. I have 4 numbers after the decimal point in the problem, so I need 4 numbers after the decimal point in the answer, which would give me 101.736. It says round the answers to the nearest cent. So this is $101.73 and then a little bit more cents. So my final answer would be $101.74. Problem number 10 says to calculate the perimeter of the shape. Perimeter just means the distance around. So in this case, you are given more information than you need. All you need to do is add up the numbers on the outside, 8 plus 9 plus 8 plus 13. When you add up all those numbers, you'll get 38. Remember to label your answer. It would be 38 feet would be the perimeter. The 7 that you are given, you're given the height of it, but you don't need to know that in order to calculate the perimeter. Problem number 11, you are asked to take 7 numbers and put them in order from the smallest to the greatest. So the smallest numbers are going to be the negative numbers, obviously first. So it's going to be negative 19, negative 4, and negative 2. Then I have a 0, and then I'm going to take a look at the positive numbers. As far as the positive numbers go, I have a 2, an 8, and an 11. So those are the numbers in order from smallest to greatest. In 12 and 13, you are asked to evaluate using the idea of absolute value. So for number 12, evaluate the absolute value of negative 14. The absolute value of negative 14 is just equal to 14. Make sure you do not say positive 14. That would be incorrect. For number 13, I'm going to evaluate that. First of all, the absolute value of negative 68 is 68. The absolute value of negative 58 is 58. But then I want to subtract. 68 subtract 58 gives me a final answer of 10. Problem number 14 gives you a subtraction problem with negative numbers. So since it's subtraction, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change that to an addition problem. The first number stays the same. Instead of subtraction, I'm going to make it addition, and I'm going to add the opposite. So instead of negative 2.6, I am going to add 2.6. Now I'm going to use the rules that were given for adding numbers that are positive negative numbers. If the signs are the same, which they are in this particular case, this is a negative number, there is an understood positive, so that's a positive number, I'm going to go through and I'm going to subtract those. 7.4 subtract 2.6 is going to give me, when I go through and do it, 4.8. And now I have to decide, is my final answer positive or negative? It's going to be a negative because the larger absolute value goes with the negative. So my final answer to this is a negative 4.8. In problem number 15, we are multiplying, and I have 6 times a negative 5 halves. I'm going to write that 6 as 6 over 1, and I'm going to multiply it by a negative 5 halves. Now remember, one thing you can do is you can just forget that it's even a negative 5 halves if you want to. Negative times a positive is going to give me a negative number. So I know my final answer has to be a negative, and now I could just go through and multiply. If I go through and do that, I'm going to probably just go through and factor out a 2 out of both the 6 and the 2. 2 divided by 2 gives me 1. 6 divided by 2 gives me 3. And then 3 times that negative 5 would give me a negative 15, which would be the final answer to the problem. In problem number 16, you are given 3 numbers, and you are adding those numbers. I'm going to go in order from left to right. So the very first one is negative 14.1 plus 6.9. Once again, I'm going to go through and I am going to subtract those numbers because one of those is positive, one of those is negative. If I go through and subtract those numbers, I am going to get a 7.2 for an answer, and then it needs to be a negative 7.2 because the larger absolute value goes with the negative number. So now I have negative 7.2 plus a negative 5.8. Since the signs are the same, I'm going to add those two numbers together, 7.2 plus 5.8. I'm actually adding the absolute values of those numbers together. I am going to get 13.0 for an answer, and I'm going to use the same sign. So my final answer to this problem is negative 13. In problem number 17, you are dividing 18 divided by negative 6. You just need to remember here, since the signs are different, one is a positive, one is a negative, my final answer has to be a negative. 18 divided by 6 gives me 3, but my answer has to be a negative 3 because I am dividing numbers that have different signs. In problem number 18, I am going to go through and I am going to figure out what the numerator is and what the denominator is separately first. So as far as the numerator goes, I need to first of all multiply 7 times a negative 6. That gives me negative 42. I have negative 42, subtract, and then 4 times 2 gives me 8. So I have negative 42, subtract 8. If I do negative 42, subtract 8, I'm going to change that to negative 42 plus a negative 8. I'm going to add the opposite of that second number. And then, because the signs are the same, I'm going to add the absolute values together, get a 50, and I'm going to use the same sign. So the top half of this is equal to a negative 50. When I do the bottom, the very first thing I have to do is figure out what's inside that set of parentheses, and I have a negative 7 plus 2. The signs are different, which means I need to subtract their absolute values. 7 subtract 2 gives me 5, and I'm going to use the sign of the larger absolute value, which is a negative 5. So what I have is I have 2 times a negative 5. Now when I multiply 2 times a negative 5, I get negative 10. And then, since I am dividing two negatives, the final answer has to be a positive, so my final answer to this problem would just be 5. Problem number 19 says to compute as indicated, and I am adding mixed numbers. The very first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a look at that and I'm going to say, I know that my answer has to be a negative number because I'm adding those two numbers together. One of them is positive, one of them is negative. So I know that the answer has to be the larger, whichever one has the larger absolute value. And that's the negative 11 3/10. So I know my final answer has to be a negative answer. Now I'm just going to go through and I am going to subtract those two numbers because that's the rule that we follow. I have 11 3/10 subtract 4 5/6. In order to do that, I'm going to have a common denominator. I'm going to change both of these to 30ths. So 3/10, in order to change it to 30ths, I have to multiply by 3 over 3. I get 9 30ths. In order to change 6 into 30ths, I need to multiply by 5 over 5, and I get 25 30ths. I can't take 9 subtract 25, so now I need to go through and I need to take 1 away from the 11, make that a 10, and that 1 that I took away, I'm going to combine it with my fraction. That 1 I took away is 30 30ths because I want to use the same denominator. So now I have 39 30ths on the top. Now I can go through and I can subtract 39 subtract 25. 39 subtract 25 gives me 14. So I have 14 30ths. That is not in lowest terms, so I'm going to divide by 2 over 2, and I am going to get 7/15. So, as a fraction, I get 7/15. I still need to subtract my whole numbers. 10 subtract 4 gives me a 6. So I have 6 7/15. But remember, at the very beginning I said I know my answer has to be a negative. So my final answer to this problem is negative 6 7/15. For problem number 20, once again, I'm just going to figure out what's the value of the numerator and what's the value of the denominator, and then put the two together. So, 14 divided by negative 7, I am just going to get an answer for that of negative 2, because I'm dividing a positive divided by a negative. For the denominator, I have 16 subtract a negative 4. I'm going to change that to 16 plus the opposite of negative 4 is 4, so I get 16 plus 4, which gives me 20. Now I have negative 2 20ths. Well, I can put that into lower terms. I can divide that by 2 over 2. Negative 2 divided by 2 gives me a negative 1. 20 divided by 2 gives me a 10. So the final answer is a negative 1/10.